My wife Michelle said she was working late. Again. It was the third night in a row. She gave me a kiss on the cheek, grabbed her work laptop, and said she had to stay behind for a big client pitch. I smiled, wished her good luck, and told her to drive safe. But that night, around 9:30, the landline rang. A woman's voice, nervous, confused. "Hi, is Michelle home? We can't reach her. She was supposed to lead the presentation tonight." I froze. "My name's Kevin Reynolds. I'm her husband. Who's this?" "This is Julia from Client Strategy. Michelle said she'd be at the office all evening, but she never showed up. We've been trying to reach her. I thought maybe she got sick or something." I stared at the clock on the microwave. 9:34 p.m. My wife had left the house at 6. She said it would be a late night. But now her coworker was calling to ask where she was. I told Julia I'd check in with Michelle and hung up. I called my wife's phone. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I texted, "Hey, Julia from work just called. Said you missed the meeting? Everything okay?" No reply. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour, phone in hand, mind racing. When Michelle walked in at 11:30, she looked exhausted. Makeup slightly smudged. She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door like nothing was wrong. "Long night," she said, kicking off her heels. "Client wanted last-minute revisions." I stared at her. "You didn't go to the office." She blinked. "What?" Julia called. "You were supposed to lead a presentation. She said you never showed." There was a pause, just long enough for the lie to take shape. Oh God, I told her I had to shift departments for the evening. I was helping Karen with a different team. It's all a mess over there right now. She must not have gotten the memo. I nodded slowly. She smiled, gave me a kiss on the forehead, and said she was going to shower. But something inside me shifted. It wasn't the first time she'd come home late with half-hearted explanations. It wasn't the first time I'd convinced myself not to ask too many questions. But this time, the lie was obvious, sloppy, and it left a taste in my mouth I couldn't ignore. You ever have that moment when you realize the person you sleep beside is keeping a part of their life locked away from you? If this has ever happened to you, stick around, because what I found next made me wish it was just an affair, but it wasn't. Not even close. Have you ever tracked someone you loved, only to find a stranger living behind their eyes? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you've ever been lied to by someone you trusted, hit that subscribe button, because this is where the real story begins. My name is Kevin Reynolds. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent the past 11 years working as a software developer for a cybersecurity firm based in Denver. Most days, I work from home. Quiet neighborhood, 2-bedroom house, 1 dog, no kids-be choice. Michelle and I met at a tech conference in Austin. She was doing marketing for a financial firm back then. Smart, sharp, effortlessly confident. The kind of woman who could own a room without raising her voice. I was the quieter one, happy to stand behind the curtain, write code, and solve problems that no one else saw coming. We balanced each other. At least, we used to. When we got married 7 years ago, I never once imagined I'd doubt her loyalty. She was the kind of partner who made me believe I could finally relax. Trust. Be safe. She paid the bills on time, remembered birthdays, texted me love notes in the middle of random Tuesdays. We didn't fight much, just the occasional tension about work hours or money like every other couple. But somewhere along the way, her schedule started shifting. At first, it was just the occasional late-night client dinner, team happy hour, last-minute presentation. I didn't think much of it. Michelle was ambitious. She'd been pushing for a regional director role and had been taking on extra responsibility to prove herself. I admired that, supported her. But soon, it was twice a week, then 3, then entire weekends out of town for team retreats I never saw emails about. And every time I asked, she had an answer, a convincing one. She was good with words, always had been. Still, I felt the silence between us getting heavier. Her eyes didn't hold mine the way they used to. Her hugs were shorter. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. So I did something I'd never imagined I'd do in our marriage. I opened the car app we used to track service history and mileage, just routine stuff. But there it was, a feature I'd never paid attention to before. Location history. And just like that, I saw it. On Tuesday night, the night she said she was at the office late, the car had been parked for 4 hours, 82 miles west of Denver, not near any office building, not near any hotel, but near a remote stretch of woods just outside of Steamboat Springs. I stared at the map for 10 minutes, zooming in, zooming out, refreshing it like the location would suddenly change. But it didn't. Then I checked the next night, Thursday. She'd said she had dinner with clients downtown. The GPS? Same location. 82 miles away. I told myself it had to be a mistake, a bug. GPS errors happen. So I waited. Next Tuesday, she left again at 6. Said she'd be home late. At 6:30, I checked the tracker. Same coordinates. That night she came home around midnight, her lipstick slightly faded. A smell I couldn't place on her coat. Not perfume. Something earthy, like pine or wood smoke. She crawled into bed beside me, whispered, "Love you," and fell asleep almost instantly. I lay awake until morning. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to assume the worst. But I'd spent my entire career spotting hidden patterns in data. And this pattern was loud. Michelle was lying. The only question now was, about what? And why did the place she kept disappearing to look nothing like a hotel? That's when I made the decision. I was going to follow her. Not out of jealousy. Out of something far stronger. Survival. The next Thursday, I told Michelle I had a virtual meeting that would run late. She smiled absently, kissed my cheek, and said she hoped my tech nerd stuff wouldn't keep me up too long. Then she left, same black blazer, same maroon tote, same script. I waited exactly 15 minutes after she pulled out of the driveway before grabbing my jacket, wallet, and keys. I had already prepped everything, early gassed up the car, charged my phone, packed a change of clothes, snacks, even a small pair of binoculars I hadn't touched since college. It felt ridiculous, like I was about to play detective in some cheap spy movie, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My gut had never screamed this loud. I pulled up the app and locked onto her GPS signal. Sure enough, she was already heading west on I-170, cruising past Golden. I gave her a 10-minute head start before I merged onto the same highway, staying 2 exits behind. My eyes flicked between the road and the little red dot on my screen, moving steadily toward the mountains. By the time we reached the outskirts of Steamboat Springs, it was nearly 9 p.m. No streetlights out here. Just long, dark stretches of 2-lane roads winding through the pines. Michelle's car veered off onto a gravel path I almost missed in the darkness. I killed my headlights, coasted to the side, and parked behind a cluster of trees. From there, I walked slow, cautious steps through dirt and brush until I reached a clearing. That's when I saw it. A cabin. 2 stories. Wood siding. Lights on inside. A faint glow spilling from the windows. Her car parked out front beside a red Subaru I didn't recognize. I crouched low and moved closer, stopping behind a wide tree trunk that gave me a perfect line of sight. Inside the cabin, I saw shadows moving. Figures. 4, maybe 5. Then Michelle. She was standing in the center of the room, barefoot now, wearing a long white robe. Her hair was let down, loose and wavy. Her hands were raised not in prayer exactly, but in something close. A man stood next to her, also in white, his face partially covered by a hood. Around them, people sat in a circle on the floor, eyes closed, hands resting on their knees. There was chanting, low, rhythmic. This wasn't a dinner. This wasn't a work retreat. This was something else. I stayed there for 20, maybe 30 minutes, watching, listening. They burned something, herbs, maybe sage. They passed around a bowl. One by one, each person dipped a cloth into the liquid and pressed it to their forehead. When Michelle's turn came, she hesitated for a moment, then did the same. The man in the hood spoke next. I couldn't hear everything, but a few words echoed through the still night air. Shed the weight of the secular. Align with purity. Reject false attachments. Michelle nodded. She was crying and smiling. That image burned into me. My wife, crying and smiling at the same time, surrounded by strangers in the middle of the forest, wearing white. I backed away slowly, breath held tight, until I reached the road. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and sat in silence, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. This wasn't an affair. It was something far worse. My wife was involved in something secret and dangerous. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I knew her at all. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight home, arriving just before 3 in the morning. Michelle didn't return until nearly 5. I pretended to be asleep, lying stiff beneath the covers, listening as she tiptoed through the bedroom, slid out of her robe, and slipped into bed like nothing had happened. Her breathing evened out within minutes. Peaceful. Like she'd been out getting a massage instead of chanting in the woods with a group of strangers. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table like always. She walked in yawning, hair damp from a shower, kissed the top of my head. "Long night," she muttered. "Yeah, same here," I said, not looking up from my laptop. She grabbed her usual travel mug, filled it halfway, and walked back out, not even noticing the tension radiating off me. Like she was used to lying now. Like it didn't even sting her conscience anymore. The next 3 days, I did what I do best. I gathered data. I started by searching the address of the cabin, cross-referencing satellite imagery, and running the property records through a few public databases. The cabin wasn't in Michelle's name. It belonged to someone named Lena Whitmore. The name triggered something in the back of my mind. I checked Facebook. There she was, Michelle's college roommate. I clicked through Lena's profile. Not much there. Just a few nature photos, quotes about rebirth and inner alignment, and one particularly eerie post pinned to the top. "We are not born to conform. We are born to cleanse." No likes, no comments, just hanging there like a digital prayer. Then I clicked on Lena's husband, Caleb Whitmore. A quick search showed he was a spiritual advisor, founder of an independent group called The Flame of Purity. Their website was bare bones. No contact page, no mission statement. Just a slideshow of scenic forest photos with phrases overlaid in bold serif font. Release the burden of modern thought. Return to the root. Detach, purify, ascend. But it was the next thing I found that made my heart stop. An archived news article from 3 years ago. Small town paper. Low reach. Easy to bury. Authorities investigate local spiritual group for financial misconduct. The group? The Flame of Purity. The article mentioned several families claiming they'd been pressured to donate large sums of money. One man said his sister had emptied her retirement account. Another said his wife had transferred the deed to their family cabin after attending 6 weeks of renewal sessions. The investigation was closed due to lack of cooperation from the victims. I closed the laptop slowly, a cold knot forming in my chest. I checked our joint savings account. It looked fine. Then I opened our retirement account. That's when I saw it. 6 withdrawals over 4 months. 10 0 25 0 18 0 40 0. The total was over 140. Zero. Gone. Transferred to a nonprofit entity called Ascension Unity Foundation. I searched the foundation. One match. Registered just last year. Listed address? Same P.O. box as the Flame of Purity. Then I checked property records for the small cottage Michelle had inherited from her grandmother 2 years ago, the one up near Estes Park we barely used. My stomach flipped when I saw the record. Michelle had signed it over. To the Ascension Unity Foundation. No conversation, no warning. I sat back in my chair, the sound of my own breathing loud in the silence. My wife hadn't just joined some fringe spiritual retreat. She'd been giving them everything. Money, land, time, and maybe soon, herself. Or worse, others. It was no longer about betrayal. It was about danger. And I was done waiting. I knew I couldn't confront her yet not without risking everything. Michelle was too deep, too calm, too convinced of whatever truth she thought she'd found. So I did what any good software developer would do. I built a trap. The first thing I did was install a data capture program on our shared laptop, the one she used occasionally when her work-issued MacBook was charging. The software was silent, invisible, and efficient. Keystrokes, screenshots, app access, everything quietly logged and sent to an encrypted folder on my private cloud. Next, I set up a virtual copy of our bank interfacia mock version with identical interface design, but none of the real financial data. I logged in with the fake account and left the tab open one evening, as bait. That same night, after Michelle had gone to bed, I opened the logs. Bingo! She had clicked it. Browsed the mock account. Checked available balance. Tried to transfer another $15,000 to the Ascension Unity Foundation account. Of course, the transfer failed. The screen gave a generic error. But now I had something irrefutable. Proof that she was still actively funneling money out. More than 140,000 wasn't enough. The next day, while she was at work, I called in a favor. Jason Porter, one of my former teammates who now worked for a small federal task force investigating digital financial fraud. We hadn't talked in years, but I told him the situation left out Michelle's name at first and asked if the Ascension Unity Foundation had ever crossed their radar. His voice went quiet. Yeah, we've had a few flags, nothing concrete, mostly tip-offs about financial abuse inside spiritual collectives. Do you have anything active? Not yet, he said. But we're watching. I asked what kind of proof would help push things forward. He said, financial documentation, direct conversations, GPS movement logs, the usual. If you can tie individuals to the fraudulent behavior, we might have a case. I opened my drive. I've got most of that already. There was a pause on the other end. Kevin, he said carefully, is your wife involved? Yes. Another pause. Then you need to move fast, because these groups, they don't just drain bank accounts. They isolate people. They manipulate them until there's nothing left. After I hung up, I made copies of everything: bank statements, GPS logs, the property deed transfer, screenshots of her attempts to transfer more funds. I put the files on a flash drive and dropped them off at Jason's office the next morning. When I got home that evening, Michelle was waiting in the living room. She was dressed in white, hair braided, calm smile on her lips. We need to talk, she said. I sat down across from her, heart pounding. I know you've been watching me, she said softly. I didn't speak. I've felt it. Your energy's different. Distrustful. Heavy. She reached across the table, rested her hand over mine. But it's okay. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Afraid of what? Of waking up, of letting go. They help me see what matters. The attachments we cling to: money, jobs, property, it's all illusion. They help me purify, and they can help you too. There it was. Not just deception. Recruitment. You're giving away everything we've built, I said, trying to stay calm. No, she whispered. I'm freeing us from it. I pulled my hand away. Michelle, do you hear yourself? You've emptied our accounts, given away a property. You're disappearing to a cabin in the woods multiple nights a week to chat with people I've never met. That's not freedom. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked pitying. You're still clinging to the old world. That's okay, but it's dying, and you'll see that soon enough. That night, after she fell asleep, I sent one last encrypted message to Jason. She tried to recruit me. She's not backing out. Use whatever you need. And then I waited. Because the flame she believed in, it was about to burn the wrong people. The knock came 3 nights later. Michelle and I were eating in silence grilled vegetables. Her idea, though neither of us touched much. I was halfway through chewing a cold zucchini slice when the doorbell rang. She looked up, confused. You expecting someone? I shook my head, already rising from the table. When I opened the door, 2 men stood outside in dark jackets. Behind them, an unmarked SUV idled quietly at the curb. Mr. Reynolds? The older one asked. Yes. We're with the Financial Crimes Division. May we come in? I stepped aside without a word. They flashed, badges federal, Legitan sat down with me in the living room while Michelle lingered awkwardly in the kitchen. I could feel her watching us, listening, but she didn't interrupt. "Thanks for the files you submitted," one agent said. "They've helped us establish probable cause for deeper investigation. This group, the Flame of Purity, they've been under quiet surveillance for nearly 2 years." I nodded slowly. The second agent leaned forward. "We've traced over 2.3 million in donations from roughly 25 families. Most of them coerced, some manipulated under spiritual pretenses. Your wife's activity, combined with others, has helped push this to the tipping point." I swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "We've obtained a warrant for the cabin, their records, and digital communications. The operation will begin tomorrow morning." From the kitchen, I heard the sound of a glass shattering. "Michelle." I turned and saw her standing there, expression pale, eyes wide, the broken stem of her wineglass still in her hand. "They're lying," she said quietly. "You don't understand what you've done." "Michelle," I said softly, "they know. About the money. About the land. About the group. This isn't just about beliefs anymore. This is about fraud." She shook her head. "It's not fraud. It's sacrifice. It's freedom." "No," the older agent said gently. "It's a felony." The next morning, while Michelle pretended to go to work, a federal team surrounded the cabin just after sunrise. What they found shocked even the investigators. There were more than 20 people inside, half in robes, the other half asleep on yoga mats and rolled blankets. Candles burned low. Boxes of cash were stacked behind a false wall in the back storage room. Caleb Whitmore was arrested on the spot for wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud through spiritual manipulation. Lena was taken in quietly, without resistance. She never looked up from the floor as they placed her in cuffs. Agents also found dozens of signed deeds, forged power of attorney documents, and digital ledgers tracking every donation. Michelle's name was on more than one of them. But here's the twist. Michelle wasn't arrested. Instead, she was named a cooperating witness. Because what the feds really needed, what they hadn't had until now, was intent, motivation, documentation. And Michelle, in her misplaced loyalty, had sent the group countless emails explaining exactly why she transferred each sum, each asset. In trying to convince them of her spiritual awakening, she gave them everything they needed. The GPS records, the emails, the transactions, her voice on tape, trying to recruit me. All of it made her less a criminal and more a manipulated party under duress. She was offered a deal, full restitution, psychological counseling, and no contact with the organization again, in exchange for testimony and access to internal communications she'd archived. She took it. Because even Michelle, for all her devotion, could see the walls were caving in. 2 weeks later, she moved out of the house. No goodbye, no note. Just a cleared-out closet and a short text. "I'm sorry you couldn't understand. I hope you find peace. I will." She left her wedding ring in the bathroom drawer. I stared at it for an hour. Then I shut the drawer and left it there. The house was quiet after she left. No more late-night returns. No more faint smell of incense clinging to her clothes. No more whispered mantras behind the bathroom door when she thought I wasn't listening. Just silence. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like oxygen. The investigation made headlines in a few local papers. Spiritual cult in Colorado mountains exposed in multi-state financial fraud. Caleb and Lena were indicted on 7 counts each. Multiple victims came forward, people who had lost homes, savings, entire retirement accounts. Some were too ashamed to speak publicly. Others called it a blessing in disguise. Michelle was never named in the articles, but she was referenced indirectly as a key witness instrumental in unlocking the group's financial network. Her testimony was used to build a timeline. Her emails used to map the group's internal language, how they preyed on emotional vulnerability under the guise of enlightenment. She still never called me. Didn't text. Didn't ask if I was okay. It was like I'd become part of the old world she'd chosen to erase. And maybe I had. After the investigation closed, I sat down with a financial advisor. Between the legal protections, the evidence trail, and Michelle's cooperation, Most of the money she had given away was recoverable. The property was returned to my name. Her name was removed from the title. In a strange way, I'd come out of it intact financially. But something deeper had cracked. Trust, maybe? Or the belief that love alone could hold back whatever darkness someone was running toward. A few months later, I got a call from Agent Porter. "Just wanted to give you closure," he said. "Caleb pled guilty. Lena's cutting a deal. This whole thing's going down fast." I thanked him. We hung up. I stood by the window for a long time after that, watching the snow fall over the quiet street. Our dog, Jasper, sat by my feet, resting his head on my leg. Still loyal. Still here. Eventually, I went upstairs, opened the bathroom drawer, and took out Michelle's ring. It felt colder than I remembered. I slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and dropped it off at her sister's house the next day. No note. Just the weight of what used to be. That night, I logged into my personal journal, one I hadn't touched in over a year, and wrote the final entry. She told me she was working late. She was building a new world. And in the process, she burned ours down. But in the ashes, I found something strange. Peace. So what did I learn? That betrayal doesn't always come wrapped in someone else's arms. Sometimes it wears the face you kiss goodnight. Sometimes it believes it's saving you. And sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had someone close to you fall under the influence of something or someone you couldn't reach? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe Kevin did the right thing, vote 1. If you're not sure, vote 6. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Max for more true stories about betrayal, resilience, and the quiet power of standing your ground every single day.